Alright, so I'm in Ableton because it's really easy to set up a rack here and also lets me show off the original Multiband Dynamics OTT preset, and I'll show you how similar it is to the Xfer one, and also show you that the Ozone 9 Dynamics set to all of the same settings, RMS mode, attack and release, inputs and output controls, crossover points, soft knee, etc., etc. If I match those as closely as possible, the result that Ozone 9 Dynamics spits out is totally different. If we... first off, I'll disable this so you can hear the patch that I'm working with. It's something that has a pretty sharp attack, and also has this tiny little bit of space, this tiny little bit of reverb and delay on the tail end that you can't really hear too much of. And I'm using this because it shows off a lot of what OTT does. It really brings up those subtle details in each range and just slams the crap out of them. So if I turn it on, it reacts how you would expect OT to react at 100% settings. You know, it's cramming everything into a narrow range. It's bringing up that stuff, but then I hit something and it immediately clamps on it. It goes from -30 or +30 all the way to -21 in almost an instant because these attacks are so fast. And it's working as one process, so you don't need to wait for the lower range to release its excessive 36 plus dB of gain before it properly clamps down on the signal. It just goes straight into it. Now, if we switch over to Ozone 9 Dynamics, something very different happens. So I'm going to solo this. I'm going to show that all the settings are pretty much exactly the same. If I go to individual bands, I've got adaptive release off. I've got them in RMS mode. I've got the knees all the way up. I've got attack release settings matched for pretty much everything. So this is acting in a way like you'd assume the Ableton Multiband Dynamics OTT preset at 100% is acting, but it's definitely not. So if I go back to the all view, you'll be able to see what's happening here. If I play one note, it's compressing. I'm really only in this upper range, but you can tell that this already doesn't seem quite right. But the real problem is with the way that the gate, or not the gate, but the upward compression range interacts. So you see that in some of the ranges, it takes a while for that upward compression to release. So it's pushing up so much detail. And just slamming it up into the limiter. And then you have to wait, like, however long the release takes. And release is kind of a guesstimation. It's more about how quick it gets to 2/3 of its target. And then there's all sorts of different things about like the release curves and attack curves, which very much likely stray from each other between Ozone Dynamics and Ableton's Multiband Dynamics. And another thought that I had is that you could possibly switch the attack and release on the upward compression, and maybe that would change things a bit. So if I go 43, 23, 280, 14, 130, but you still have some of the same problems. And it's better, you don't get that big whoom because it's trying to push up low frequencies that are barely there. But there's this chug between the upward compression releasing and then the limiter smacking down on the results, and then a little flub that happens as the limiter reacts differently as the upward compression changes, so it's just all out of whack. But that's the inherent problem, is that these two do different things. The upward compression, the compression stage and the limiter stage in Dynamics are unlinked, they're serial, they don't talk to each other. So if one does something crazy, the other has to react to it. They're not working in tandem. And then I've also got Xfer's OTT here to just show that it's pretty much the same thing. If I solo that, it's at 100% as it should be. So if I go to Ableton's, it's almost a perfect recreation, and Steve Duda knew what Ableton's multiband dynamics was doing and replicated that. He probably did some initial tests on his own that came to results a lot like Ozone's dynamics, and I could show this off with any other multiband tool that gives you both options, or stacking two against each other, one with multiband expansion, or whatever you want to call it, upward compression, expansion. They're basically... No, they're not the same thing. I know why you're confused. I'm calling it expansion in the thread when it's actually upward compression. That's my bad. And I'm incorrect there. I'll put that in the text post that accompanies this video, and if you've read that, you've already seen it. But yeah, it's just it's a different thing, a very different effect when you've got two different dynamics processes, upward compression and downward compression, in serial as unlinked processes. That's very different than a calculation that's done that does have different threshold ranges, but reacts to the signal with one process, with one dynamic process. I think showing it off like this is the best that I could explain it. So yeah, I hope that helps. Hope that all makes sense. Thank you.